Hello again, PEPSA participants. Welcome to the fourth and final video in the PEPSA Inquiry video series. And you know me already, I'm Nancy Fichtman-Dana, and I have had the honor of working with PEPSA and the PEPSA program to create these videos just for you. And I am very excited to share with you the final video. And in order to do so, like I've always done, I have created some PowerPoint slides to guide us through our discussion in this final video. And this final video focuses on data analysis. So here we go. Let's start again, as we always have, with a very brief and quick review. Now you know all about this process called inquiry, and that it's all about systematically and intentionally studying your own practice as a teacher, and that it is something that you do naturally and normally as a teacher anyway. But what we do is we take this reflective process that all great teachers do, and we make it less happenstance and more intentional, and we create a space for it actually to happen. And we give words to this natural process that all teachers use. We name the different components of it so that you have a language to talk about studying your practice and studying your work with students with autism. And we talked about developing questions to guide you in your inquiry journey. And there are 5 components of great questions that we reviewed. And then in our last video, we just talked about, once you have a question, well, how do you gain insights into that question? And we talked about different data collection strategies that you can use, some that you're very familiar with and you do all the time, and some strategies that you might not have ever even thought of as data collection. We went through each one of those and talked about them a little bit and described and exemplified them so that you were ready to develop a plan for your own PEPSA inquiry journey. And hopefully you have done that with the help of your CARD facilitators and PEPSA facilitators, and you are well on your way to implementing that plan, or you are excited about getting started and you're so excited that you want to learn a little bit more about data analysis now so you know what's ahead. So that is what this video focuses on. It's that process of data analysis. So let's begin by simply defining data analysis for a teacher inquirer. So while it might sound a little scary, data analysis and overwhelming, simply all you're doing is creating a story of your learning as an inquirer based on a close and careful examination of the data that you collected. Now, remember way back to that first introductory video on inquiry, I did define data analysis for you at that time, and I talked about the dynamic interplay between data collection and data analysis. I think it's going to make a lot more sense to you now that we have gone in more depth about the data collection process, to really understand that dynamic interplay and to also understand the definitions of 2 different types of data analysis. The first is formative and the second is summative. So let's look at those definitions now. So formative data analysis is the process of carefully considering data as you collect it, using your consideration of it to help inform instructional decisions and next steps in your inquiry. And formative data analysis, again, that's something that we as teachers do all the time. So I think this notion of formative data analysis, like if you see something particular in student work, and it triggers something in your mind to make a change or adjustment in your teaching, that's formative data analysis. If you observe a student action and that triggers something in your mind to make an adjustment or change in your instruction and the next steps in your inquiry, that's formative. And that's what we do all the time, right? We observe during a lesson how the lesson is being received by students, and we make adjustments as we go. So formative data analysis is pretty intuitive for teachers, and it's something I think that will come quite easily to you. However, there's also summative data analysis, and that might be a little different than what you're used to. So, summative data analysis happens after all of your data for an inquiry is collected. And it is defined simply as creating a story of your learning as an inquirer based on a close and careful examination of your data, making claims about your learning, what you learned, and supporting those claims with evidence from your data. So think back, for example, to our illustration of the inquiry process in the very first video by Debbie Hubble. If you recall, through data analysis, she distilled three themes from her qualitative data: enjoyment, um, academic knowledge that students could talk about, and positive social interactions. And remember, I named each one of those themes, and then I used excerpts from the Dear Mrs. Hubble letters to illustrate those themes. So that's the idea about making claims about your learning. Debbie learned that using fractured fairy tale plays brought joy and enthusiastic response from her students. And then she supported that claim with evidence from her data, excerpts from her Dear Mrs. Hubble letters. Okay, so that's a very quick review of the and definition of summative data analysis. But you can see in this picture that I selected to put on this slide, it can be overwhelming to teacher inquirers after they've engaged in a cycle of inquiry and they've collected data over time to sort of know, like, okay, what do I do with it when I get to the summative data analysis process? And you might feel some anxiety, like, help me, I've collected all this stuff. Now, what do I do? So have no fear. That is what this video is all about. So what you need to do is just ask yourself when you get to the summative data analysis phase, what kind of data did I collect? And in review, there's two types of data. There's quantitative data. That's data that takes the form of numbers. And then there's qualitative data, data that takes the form of words or images. So how do you examine quantitative data? So again, that's one that I think we're pretty used to as teachers and we have a lot of experience with. Basically, the best way to examine quantitative data is to create graphs or maybe charts or tables. And here's an example again from Debbie Hubble's quantitative data that you saw in the very first video. She created a table of students' DIBELS scores, and that way she can compare them over time and look for trends in the development of fluency in each of her students. So there you go, that's quantitative data. Something that's really important, though, to remember in the analysis of quantitative data is that you want to make meaning of it in different ways. So here are some examples, like you might average pre and post test scores and compare and contrast them. You might look at individual students and how much each student has gained. You might sort students by small, medium, and large gains and see if that gives you any insights. So A adjective I'm going to use is this notion of playing. That's in essence what you want to do with your data. You kind of want to play with it because looking at it in different ways can bring you to new and sometimes deeper insights. So always remember to take some time to play with your data, look at it in different ways, and see if anything surprises you when you look at it in different ways, or if anything new is revealed when you sort it in different ways. So now we're going to move on to what I think is a question that is less intuitive and teachers have less experience with, and that's how you examine qualitative data. So remember, these are data that take the form of maybe images or words. So it might be notes from an interview that you did with a student. It might be one of your journal entries. It may be student work that is, writing or like the Dear Mrs. Hubble letters, for an example. So, you can't really chart those or graph them. So, what is it that you do with qualitative data? Basically, you do four things. First, you gather it all in one place and you read it through it. Then, once you read through it, you begin to condense it and try to extract pieces of it that are particularly meaningful in relationship to the question that you posed. So then you have these different pieces and you begin to categorize and sort the different pieces together. Pieces that fit together, you group and you regroup, and then you regroup them again in different ways. So that is the short story on how you look at qualitative data. But now let's look at the steps in the data analysis process one at a time. Whether you're reviewing quantitative data, qualitative data, or both together. In most cases, it will be both together, or it will be qualitative data because there are many, many forms of qualitative data that are useful for a teacher inquirer. So that first step is called description. So what you are going to do is you're going to gather together and you're going to read through your entire data set one time simply to get a sense of what you have. So remember, you may have collected data over a period of time, and again, classrooms are really busy places. So you might not remember everything. So this is a time to say, okay, let me look at everything that I have so I can remember what I collected and it's fresh in my head. And these are some questions you can ask as you do that process. Remember to say to yourself, why did I inquire in the first place? One of the things I always tell inquirers that I'm coaching is to take their wondering and to write it on a large piece of paper and to literally post it in their workstation where they're going to analyze data so that they have those kind of blinders on, helping them remember why they inquired and what they're looking for in the data. What is the question that you want to gain insights into? Another question is simply, what did I see as I inquired? A third question is, what do I notice about my data? So really think about that process of noticing what's happening and being curious about what's happening. And then also a question that might help you as you read through your data the first time and get a descriptive sense of what's there is thinking about, how would you describe your data to others? All right, so that is the first step. The second step we call sense making. And that step, you're looking for patterns, themes, insights. And what you're going to do here is you're going to code your data. You're going to group and regroup it in different ways to find the most important story of your learning. And here are some questions that will help bring meaning to that definition of the sense making phase. So the first question is, what is most interesting about these data that you're looking at? and take note of what's interesting, what's fascinating about what you see happening. What are some things in my data that stand out from the rest? How might different pieces of my data fit together? And then what do I learn from examining my practice in different ways? So this is all that notion of sense making, step number 2. The third step in data analysis is interpretation. But before we move to that step, again, I want to share an important note. It's similar to what I shared about quantitative data. When you're making meaning of qualitative data, you want to play with it. You want to compare and contrast the different ways that you're organizing things. Ask, what similarities do I see? What differences do I see? And it's really important too to think about what data doesn't seem to fit and why do I think it doesn't fit. Sometimes we can learn a lot from outlying data, something that doesn't seem to be falling into a pattern. So we shouldn't discount it. We should also look at things that aren't falling into some kind of pattern and wonder a little bit about why it doesn't fit. And there can be a lot of great learning that happens there as well. All right, so now we're moving on to that third step, and that is called interpretation. And the definition of the interpretation phase of data analysis is to story your learning by constructing statements that express what you learned and what that learning means, and then use data excerpts to support it. So again, some questions that will help you make sense of this description of the interpretation step is asking yourself as you look at your data, what was my initial wondering and how do the patterns that emerged in the sense-making stage inform my question that I have hanging up in front of me to keep me focused? And then a second question is, what is happening in each of the patterns I see and across patterns? And then finally, the fourth phase is implications. And that is described as reflecting on what you're learning through this particular cycle of inquiry has meant for your practice. And here are 6 questions that you can ask yourself in order to draw implications from the cycle of inquiry that you just completed. The first one is, what have I learned about myself as a teacher? The second one is, what have I learned about students? The third is, what have I learned about the larger context of schools and schooling? The fourth is, what are the implications of what I have learned for my practice? Because remember, inquiry is all about you. It's focused inward on your practice. So what are the implications? What things do you want to change and do differently? And that leads to the fifth question, what changes might I make in my practice? And then finally, remember, inquiry is a cycle. So when you pass through one cycle, it leads to new wonderings. So the final implication question is, what new wonderings do I have? All right, so I always think it's really helpful to see examples. So that's why I shared with you Debbie Hubble's story, and I shared with you Stephanie Whitaker's classroom experience, teaching and inquiring. So in relationship to data analysis, I want to share the story of Mickey and Kristen with you. They are both high school teachers, and they're very experienced inquirers. And I have a really wonderful video that shows Mickey reflecting on the data analysis process with the help of Kristen. And what I'm going to do is, after I give you a little bit of background about both Mickey and Kristen, then I'm going to share with you the link for where you can find that video easily so that you can watch it and see an example of data analysis in action. And I think that's going to be really helpful for you when you get to that summative data analysis phase. So I highly recommend you visit the website that I'll share, find the video and watch it. and it'll be really helpful. And by visiting the website I share, I will also be introducing you to other resources that may help you with your PEPSA inquiry process. All right, so now a little background about Mickey and Kristen. So both Mickey and Kristen are very experienced teacher inquirers. They started inquiry in 2005, and they have been engaging in cycles of inquiry for 20 years. That's pretty amazing. They were hooked on inquiry and are hooked on inquiry. But I think what's something that is very important for me to share with you before you go to the video of their data analysis process and watch it is that you know that they started small and simple, just like you are going to start with your PEPSA inquiry project. So I don't want you to get overwhelmed when you watch these 20-year plus teacher inquirers talk about data analysis. I want you to know their background and know where they started, and that they started in the same place that you are, very small and simple. But what's so cool is with time, every cycle of inquiry, you get better, not just as a teacher, but as a teacher inquirer. So you'll see how sophisticated they've gotten. But let's back up and look at their first cycles of inquiry in 2005. So Mickey is a high school biology teacher, and she was really frustrated. The thing that was keeping her up at night was the quality of student notebooks that her students were keeping. They were very poor, and she really wanted to improve student science notebooks. So she did an intervention, planned and observed. She gave students time to work on their notebooks during class, during her biology class. Prior to that, notebook work had happened as homework outside of class time. She instituted open notebook quizzes, so the students knew if they did a good job on their notebooks, that they could use them as a resource for quizzes, and that would help improve their grades. And then she also assigned each of her students a notebook buddy, and they would look at their notebooks together and compare and contrast them again during class time. So she did this intervention, and she collected data, both observational data, the student notebooks served as data as well. And then she also discussed it with her colleagues. So that was Mickey's first cycle of inquiry. Kristen is a geometry teacher at the same school as Mickey. And I'm sorry, she's an algebra teacher. I'm sorry about that. She taught geometry as well, but this particular cycle of inquiry I'm going to tell you about is algebra. So her burning question, what was keeping her up at night when she started her very first inquiry cycle back in 2005, where she was so frustrated her students were not taking time to work out their math problems. And she knew on the state assessment at the time, the state assessment was multiple choice answers. And she was just frustrated because she couldn't take her students to get her students to use scrap paper and actually work through the problems before they selected the multiple choice answer. So her question was, how can I get students to work through their problems consistently? So she planned and observed. In her work with her students, began leaving space in each question on worksheets for students to show their work. And then she gave students partial credit for showing their work, even if they got the answer wrong, thinking that might be an incentive to get into that habit and develop that habit of always working through a problem before you pick an answer. So, of course, student work was a way that she collected data and student observation, as well as doing some interviews with her students as well as they worked out the answers to questions that she posed. And like Mickey, she discussed her inquiry with colleagues, so she got some colleague feedback as well. So again, I just want to emphasize before you go look at this video that Mickey and Kristen started small and simple, just like I just shared with you. But you're going to see a much more sophisticated cycle of inquiry in the video on data analysis, because their inquiries got deeper and more sophisticated with each cycle. And they've been engaging in inquiry for, as I said, about 2 decades now. So, one of the things that happened in their work was that over time and cycles of inquiry, they uncovered some inequities in student performance, in student opportunities and performance. And they realized that they believe that had to do with tracking, which is a common practice in high schools where you have different levels. You have a regular biology class or regular algebra class, and then you have an honors biology and an honors algebra class. And from looking at the literature, they learned that tracking practices, there's lots and lots of evidence that that is not a good practice for learners that are not in the more advanced classes. So they detracked and studied their detracked practices. Every student in their school was assigned to honors biology and honors geometry. And they had amazing positive results. They had the highest end of course exam scores in the state of Florida on the biology and the geometry and the algebra end of course exams. But in their professional learning community where they met, the two of them met with another person on the team. When they further analyzed their data, they realized that the lowest achievers were Black males living in poverty, and their highest achievers were not scoring as high as they expected. So even though that's that idea of playing with data, at first look, wow, they celebrated their end of course exams were the highest in the state. But let's play with the data. Let's take a closer look at it. And this is what they uncovered from playing with their data. So that led them to a new cycle of inquiry where they developed the new wondering, how do we better meet the needs of our struggling and advanced learners in our detracked biology and geometry classrooms? And I realize now, I'm sorry, I'm going back between geometry and algebra, but indeed it was geometry that Kristen was teaching at this particular time. And so again, they turn to the literature like we talked about in the last video. Literature is a form of data that every teacher inquirer should collect. And in turning to the literature, they found some very promising strategies that they wanted to implement as an intervention to gain insights into that question that they posed. And those strategies were differentiation and standard-based grading. So, what the video that I'm going to share with you is the story of Mickey in particular and her inquiry journey to gain insights into that particular question with a particular focus on the ways that she analyzed data with Kristen's help. And you are going to be transported into their school. And as you watch this video, you will watch them dialogue together about the data analysis process. And you will see the 4 steps that I described earlier in this video play out for them. So I highly recommend that you take a visit to this website. So it's drnancydana.com. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second so that I can take you to that site and you will be able to see exactly what you are going to see when you get there. So when you go to my site, it'll take you to the home page. but I already have clicked on inquiry videos. And again, here's another resource for you. So you have the book that I wrote on the inquiry process as a resource for your PEPSA inquiry journey that we've talked about before. But I wanted to leave you in this final video with more video resources that may be helpful and useful for you as you work on your PEPSA video and or as you continue as an inquirer throughout your career. So on this site, you can find a number of videos. You see there's one introducing the inquiry process. So if you would like a brief review of what we did in the first PEPSA inquiry video, and some elaboration on that, you can visit and watch that inquiry video. Here's another video, Inquiry as a Pathway to Understanding Teaching Strategies and Techniques. That is one of the 8 passions that you might use to find your first wondering that you're going to explore as a PEPSA teacher inquirer. So this particular video might be interesting to you. You might gain some insights about using inquiry to study teaching strategies and techniques. There's another video focused on inquiry as a pathway to equity. And then here it is. This is the one I'm suggesting for you and I'm talking about. And there you see Mickey McDonald and you see Kristen Weller. And this is the video I really want you to watch because data analysis for the teacher researcher at the end of an inquiry cycle, when they're doing their summative work, it can feel a little mysterious. So by watching this video, it's going to demystify this data analysis process for you. And I just think the world of both Mickey and Kristen as experienced teacher inquirers. And there is no one better than an experienced teacher inquirer to teach you about the data analysis process. So please take a visit to that website, find data analysis for the teacher researcher, click on that video, and you'll be able to watch it in its entirety. It's just about 8 or 9 minutes long, so it won't take you very long as well. And then you'll see the video that was a part of the example of Stephanie Whitaker earlier, and then a couple other videos as well that can serve as a wonderful resource for you. All right, so that is the website. That's another resource for you. And let me go ahead and go back to our PowerPoint slides. So once again, jot it down. You will find that inquiry video on data analysis at drnancydana.com, as well as other videos that can be a resource for you. And then once you watch that video, here is your 4th and final think time question in relationship to your work as a PEPSA inquirer. So what have you learned about the data analysis process for a teacher inquirer from watching Mickey and Kristen at work? And how might this help you when you get to the data analysis component of your PEPSA inquiry? So once again, I want to encourage you to watch that video. And then as you watch that video, think about what you're learning about the data analysis process. So for example, one thing I think you're going to learn is to be open to be surprised by your data. And think about other things that you learn and then, just reflect on, okay, now that I've seen Mickey and Kristen and I have an example, how might that help me when I do summative data analysis for my PEPSA inquiry cycle journey? And again, one more time, I just want to remind you that you do have the resource of the book on inquiry that PEPSA has provided for you. So please, please, please check out the chapter on data analysis in this book. There is so much more detail in the book about data analysis. And the book will also illustrate data analysis again with yet another teacher inquirer's work. So that chapter on data analysis will be gold for you as you work on summative data analysis as a part of your inquiry. And so, of course, as I have ended every PEPSA inquiry video in the series, I have to end by wishing you a wonderful inquiry journey and, of course, happy inquiring. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this PEPSA program, and I wish you all the best as you learn with and from your students with autism through the process of inquiry. All the best. Happy inquiring.